They pulled up in a white SUV like they owned the road. Slow, polite doors opening in unison, and the woman in the blazer smiled at me like she was delivering a welcome wagon rather than a verdict. "Welcome to Maple Ridge Estates. Your land is now part of our HOA. I'd spent months rebuilding 5 burned acres with my own hands. They walked onto my dirt and told me it belonged to them. That was the first time I realized rebuilding is easier than keeping what you rebuild. I'm Ethan Carter. I used to run wildfire operations for a living. I know the smell of burned pitch and the exact way a foundation sags when earth gives up. I bought that parcel through a federal surplus sale, clean deed cash in hand, because after 30 years of watching fire redraw maps, I wanted a place that would hold still long enough for me to breathe. What I did not sign up for was a small-town version of highway robbery dressed up in community speak. The SUV backed away, leaving a thin cloud of dust and the sort of quiet that isn't peaceful. It's calculated. Karen Blackwell introduced herself with a handshake the size of an affidavit and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had a folder thick enough to kill a small animal. She didn't present herself as a neighbor. She presented a boundary line, a new protective zone suggested membership enrollment, $1 $100 a year, and offered as a favor a palette of approved paint colors and instructions where to hide my water tanks. I stood in my frame house and listened to a woman in a blazer explain how my rebuilt windows and my ember-resistant siding clashed with the cul-de-sac a mile away. I took her paperwork, flipped through it, and all the grand language and rubber stamps couldn't change the truth in my pocket a clear title. Federal paperwork, the smell of fresh concrete. You can't paper over ownership like you can a latte stain. That day they left, I thought it was posturing. I was wrong. The next morning, one of my boundary stakes was missing. The dirt, where it had stood, was freshly turned. Someone had wrenched it out like a thumbtack. A white SUV watched from the bend in the road like a predator taking its time. Then it drove off. By dusk, 5 of my solar panels were shattered glass, spiderwebbed and glittering in the late light. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. No prints, no careless tracks, no juvenile bragging. Then 2 concrete barricades with bright red stencils, HOA. Property do not enter. Sat in the middle of my driveway like territorial trophies. They weren't just making noise, they were making a claim. I called the sheriff. The dispatcher was polite. His voice had that bureaucratic flattening that tells you the stakes are someone else's problem. "Sounds like a civil dispute," he said. Civil. I stood in front of those barricades and watched dust settle on the words as if acceptance could be painted onto the earth. For a while I let myself be angry. That was healthy practical. I photographed everything. I wrote calm emails. I filed complaints. They answered with pending reviews and requests for more time, the classic administrative slow bleed. Then I found a bent screw from a camera mount half buried in the dirt. Someone had taken down a camera by force. Someone had planned to leave nothing that would show their face. I have an old drone, the kind we used in the field to map hot zones. I launched it more out of habit than hope and skimmed through archived footage. There he was, 6 weeks earlier, walking the boundary line, a dark green vest with a Maple Ridge logo stamped on the back and a red gas can in his hand. Not clearing brush. Not building defensible space. Walking like he knew where the work would start. That frame froze me because fires don't start themselves. Someone starts them. I drove into town and found Tom Wilkins at the Gazette, a man who still believes in ink and digging. He pulled a box for me, and in it a preliminary incident file from the past year, a controlled burn logged by the HOA no permit recorded with the county, a photo of a sign scorched and leaning with the words HOA maintenance barely legible. That meant something ugly. Someone cleared a buffer with a burn they did not have the right to start, and everything that followed, lives lost, homes gone, didn't smell like bad luck anymore. It smelled like negligence. I folded that photo into my jacket and went home with a weight that had nothing to do with tools. That night, a padded envelope slid under the Gazette's back door with one sheet inside unsigned. Karen gave the order. I warned them about the wind. They ignored me. I have the recordings it said signed only with an M. The next morning, Marcus Delaney walked into a diner and asked me to sit down. He'd been part of the maintenance crew. He wore his fear like a coat. When you've been complicit, fear has a certain kind of honesty to it. He slid a tiny USB across the table, and it felt heavier than its size. On it were recordings of a board meeting, Karen's voice crisp. "We clear buffer now, no permit, just do it." Marcus had warned them the wind was wrong. They lit it anyway. The fire jumped the line. It raced toward people houses, someone didn't make it. Marcus said he'd kept a copy just in case. Hearing your enemy admitted on tape changes something in the stomach. That was the moment I stopped pacing and started planning. I called Lena Kim. She'd been the investigator who walked my property the first week I started framing a CAL FIRE investigator with no patience for games and the sort of quiet that means work gets done. She came out without badges, driving a dented Tacoma like a woman who wants to be useful, not noticed. We laid everything out on my kitchen table: the drone frames, the melted HOA tag, the fake boundary map, the USB. She looked through the stuff with the same steady hands she uses to examine burn scars and said, "If this lines up, this is manslaughter. This is jurisdictional fraud." She didn't say hope, she said procedure. That feels like the kind of solid thing you learn to trust when your world smells like smoke. We handed the USB to her. She put it in an evidence pouch like she was handing a lit match to the people who can turn it into prosecution. 3 days later, the convoy came. Not the polite white SUV. This time, state vehicles, CAL FIRE enforcement DOJ vans, black SUVs, more people than I've seen at a wildfire briefing. They moved like they knew where to hit. Gates were forced, files were boxed, laptops seized. Karen stood in her cream blazer and tried to command the scene as if a warrant were merely a misplaced formality. An agent read rights. Another agent slid a warrant across to an HOA office, and for the first time I watched the bad faith of a system become painfully small in the face of actual law. The sheriff, who shrugged me off on the phone, was pushed aside with a polite, firm hand. "Jurisdictional limits," the agent said. I watched Karen smile do that slow slide off a face when someone else is holding the microphone. They carried out boxed minutes labeled controlled burn planning drafts of boundary maps with dates that made my jaw drop, and a desktop tower wrapped in yellow evidence tape, the kind of thing you use to hide or scrub records. Marcus was escorted to a protected vehicle. Tom Wilkins stood at the edge of the cordon with his notebook and a face that looked as tired as the piles of paper he loves. When they led Karen away, she tried the old script lawyering faux outrage, a hint of calling the right people. It didn't work. It's an odd feeling watching someone who spent years telling people what to do momentarily humbled by handcuffs and procedure. I felt nothing like triumph. The years in the line teach you to recognize the thin line between justice and revenge. That day was justice moving forward, loud, clumsy, necessary. The barricades at my driveway were taken away. The solar panels were cataloged as evidence. The county maps reverted to the clean GIS overlay. Lena gave me plain and accurate. I didn't throw a cookout. I didn't stand on the porch and proclaim victory. I walked the perimeter at dusk and said to a land that had seen more than people, "You're safe now." For a long time I thought winning would feel like fireworks. It didn't. It felt like the air getting a little clearer, like a breath you've been holding finally leaving you. There was a moment in the middle of all this when I sat on my half-built porch with my head in my hands and truly considered walking away, selling the lot, letting someone else deal with HOA meetings and harassing SUVs, because it's easier to fold than drag a fight across town. I questioned whether I'd read the signs right, whether my anger had turned into paranoia. I thought about the people who died in that fire, and I couldn't in good conscience let the explanation be bad luck. That thought, the quiet responsibility to the dead to truth, is what pulled me off the porch. Not heroism, not glory, just the kind of stubbornness that says if lies get to live unchecked, then the world keeps burning people. The raid closed a chapter. It didn't open a party. Karen's indictment sat on a table like a thing trimmed with legalese. Marcus had a chance at something like redemption because he chose to hand over what he had. Lena went back to her reports. Tom printed the story. Meantime, my land sat where it always had, charred and stubborn and slowly healing. I still walk the property sometimes just to feel that steadier kind of tired the one you get from building instead of watching things fall. The lesson I keep to myself now is short paperwork and power don't beat truth. They only hide it until someone shines a light. Truth finds a way.